So the other day, I was listening to a JavaScript podcast, and one of the guests was saying that the two-way data binding in Angular is actually one of the biggest problems with Angular. And to be fair, you can certainly create poor data workflows with two-way data binding. I know, I've done it. But you can also create a lot of poor scenarios with many coding constructs that aren't inherently bad. And two-way data binding, to me, is actually one of the most powerful features of Angular. And it's something that I certainly use every day with much success. So I wanted to just take a quick look at what I consider to be the irrational demonization of two-way data binding and hopefully shed some light on the benefits, the exciting benefits that two-way data binding bring to an Angular application. So to explore this concept, I created a little tagging widget where essentially it's a collection of tags that you can add and remove from. So I can say nifty, sweet, good, jammin', right? I can add here and then I can remove. I also have the same thing down here. Slothful, unkind, mean, meh, right? And I can remove and add and so forth. This is not meant to be a fantastic user experience. This is meant to explore data binding. These are the same component. One is being used and consumed with two-way data binding, and one is being used and consumed with one-way data binding. And I want to just demonstrate that two-way data binding is something that you can opt into in Angular or opt out of when you need more control over how data is being synchronized across touch points. So let's take a look at our app component. So our app component, again, has two instances of this BN tags, this custom component here for creating that tagging widget. And in the first instance, I'm using the so-called box of bananas template syntax to create two-way data binding. And what that means is that this tags A, which is a property of my app component, is going to be implicitly and automatically synchronized with the data being passed into and being emitted from this tags component. So when the tags component emits changes to the tags value, those values are going to be implicitly piped back into the tags A variable using two-way data binding. Conversely, this second instance here uses one-way data binding. So we just pipe the tags B collection into the tags component, and then we listen for add and remove events. We then consume those add and remove events using app component level methods, right? Add tag to B and remove from B, where you can see here, if I want to add a tag, I'm concatenating it with the tags B to explicitly control how that tags B array is being configured. You can see that we're not mutating the tags B collection directly, we're creating a new array. Similarly with remove from B, given an index of the tag, I'm simply creating a new tags B collection based on the slices before and after the given index. So what you'll notice here is that the two-way data binding requires no additional logic in this component whatsoever. It requires no additional code. And that's really the exciting benefit of two-way data binding, is you get this powerful data synchronization with absolutely no effort. Of course, you have to buy in to the implicit data synchronization provided by the two-way data binding, otherwise you wouldn't be using it in the first place. The one-way data binding, or the unidirectional data flow, uses additional event handlers here so that we can figure out how we want to react to the tags component events and mutate or alter, create new arrays internally, and then of course we pipe those changes back in through the input binding. So using a unidirectional data flow gives us more flexibility, but requires a lot more logic. So the question really just becomes is, do you need that additional logic? If you do, then the unidirectional or one-way directional data flow is perfect, and if you don't, then the bidirectional data flow is really powerful and requires almost no effort. Now the cool thing about this BN tags, this tags component, is that it supports both unidirectional and two-way data binding. So let's take a quick look at how that works. So here's our tags component, and you'll see that it has an input binding for tags, which is the array of strings coming in. and then it exposes two events, add and remove, and those facilitate the unidirectional or one-way data binding workflow. And then it also exposes a tags change event. Now, it's important to understand how this so-called box of bananas syntax works in Angular. So for example, let me just open up a new tab here. If I have some sort of value input binding, right, and I have a value change output binding, this becomes syntactically the same as, sorry, I can't type, this. So value here, which it doesn't matter what it's called, this could be called foo, it could be called x. Essentially what it means is that if we have an input binding of name x and an output binding of name x change, then we can use the box of bananas two-way data binding to implicitly pipe these events back into the input binding. So essentially what this really is a shorthand for is, let's call this XX, and let's call this X change, and this just becomes X equals event. So the event being emitted by the X change output binding gets piped back into the X binding, which is getting piped back into the input binding. So, close that. So in order for this syntax to work, what we need is for the bn tags component to have a tags input and a tags change output. And if we jump back into the tags component, you'll see that's what we have. We have our tags input and our tags change output. Now the tags change output, because eventually what's going to happen is the event is just going to get piped back into the input. It means that the tags change output has to emit a modified collection based on the particular intent of the user. So if we're going to add a tag, it has to emit an array with a new tag added. If we're going to remove a tag, it has to emit an array with the particular index deleted. So I don't want to get too much into the particulars of the component here itself, but what you'll see is that I have an input internally, which in the implementation details here also uses two-way data binding internally using ngModel to bind the input value to the new tag name. The new tag name, let's go look at the process new tag. The new tag name then gets emitted as a tags add event for the one-way or the unidirectional data flow. But then you'll see that I'm also taking the input, I'm concatenating the new name, this is going to create a new array, and then I'm emitting that as the tags change event, and it's this event that facilitates the two-way data binding so that I can then pipe this value essentially right back into the tags input. And then for the tag remove, we're doing essentially the same thing. We're emitting an event for the unidirectional data flow as well as an event for the two-way bidirectional data flow. So what we've done here is we've created a component that through its inputs and outputs supports both unidirectional data flow as well as bidirectional two-way data bindings. And internally, as a fun coincidence, we're also using two-way data bindings through the ngModel tag, or through the ngModel directive internally. So what you can see is that two-way data binding in Angular is powerful. It requires very little additional code, right? We have no additional code here for the ngModel. In the app component, we have no additional here for the two-way data binding on the tags input. And it has very little downside. Of course, you can create downside by creating bad code. That's always the truth. Unidirectional data flow, on the other hand, requires some additional logic, but gives us some more flexibility. For example, I could, in this case, check to see if a tag already exists and prevent duplicate tags from being created. Or maybe I could transform the tag so that all tags are added as uppercase. Or I could, let's say, take a tag that has spaces in it, split it on the spaces, and actually add multiple tags to the collection before that collection gets piped back into the tags component. So if you need that additional logic, that interception, that transformation, the unidirectional data flow, the one-way data flow is perfect, but requires more code. The ultimate lesson here is that two-way data binding is something that you opt into in Angular. It's a powerful feature that facilitates some powerful implicit data handling in cases where you want that powerful implicit data handling. And it's a feature that you can opt out of when you need more explicit data control and synchronization. So ultimately, to me, the two-way data binding is one of the most exciting parts of Angular. And people who demonize two-way data binding, I think, are doing it based on no rationale other than it allows you to create bad code. But lots of things allow you to create bad code. That doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that you have to understand how they work and understand what cases make sense, what cases don't make sense. So hopefully, the intent of this exploration here is to, one, showcase the kind of opt-in, opt-out nature of two-way data binding in Angular, and hopefully to help you, maybe as a more junior developer, better evaluate the constitution of people who are dismissing two-way data binding out of hand.